Race does come into play.
This is Let Your Voice Be Heard right here on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. And we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard. This is Jackie Cohen. I am here with Alyssa Fuchs and Selena Hill. If you want to call in to our show, we encourage that you do. You can call the number 212-650-6903.
Yes. Please do. And also tweet us.
Yes, Be Heard _ radio.
Twinsies. Or you can leave a comment on Politically Preposterous.
Or you can just come say hi. I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah, hey.
All right, guys, we're back in again. Stanley Fritz is not here, but he'll be back more than likely.
Good.
As long as he's not hungover next Sunday, he'll be back here sitting in this seat. Okay, guys? So a little FYI. We're actually going to talk about gun control and gun regulation for this part of the show. And we have a very special guest in the studio, who I will introduce in just a moment. So do you guys remember that really nice weekend in April? It was like 75 to 80 degrees here in New York City. Like, I finally didn't have to wear a jacket, and I had like so much fun. It was a Saturday, and then the Sunday was really nice. And, for the most part, I think most of us really enjoyed the weekend. However, that same weekend, which happened to be from Friday, April 17th to Sunday, April 20th, there were 21 shootings. Well, there were 21 people were shot and 2 people were actually killed from gun violence right here in New York City. It's just one weekend, and it's pretty mind-blowing. But then again, I'm like, this happens all the time, and it's not even headlining news.
Right.
And I remember we talked about guns so much right after Sandy Hook, right? And right after the massacre in Colorado, when we had the Dark Knight shooting.
And
we talked
Gabby
about
Giffords was killed.
Shot
in the head. And other people were killed.
Exactly. And it's like, when we have that type of gun violence, it's headlining news, right? It's the central thing in national discourse. But when people who are majority black and brown are continually shot in one area or in one short period of time, it's not really news anymore, because it's just like, okay, well, that area is plagued by gangs, or they have a lot of guns here. But today we want to go a little deeper and talk about how are these guns even getting into the hands of some of these criminals, right? They're being sold on the black market, but they're not manufacturing the guns. They're coming from somewhere. They're coming from other states like Virginia, in which they have such these lax laws when it comes to guns. You can buy a gun no matter what your background is, no matter what it is that no matter your training, you can get this gun, and then it's sold on the black market here. I know Alyssa wanted to chime in quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. You said coming up, there's so many guns coming up from up that line that there's even a name for I-95. It's known as the Iron Pipeline, and that is because it is one of the most trafficked routes to bring guns that are initially sold legally, usually to what we'll call a straw purchaser, somebody who can legally go and buy that gun, who then turns around and brings that gun through the Iron Pipeline up I-95 from the south to the north, and then resells that gun to somebody who could not have purchased that gun.
Exactly. And that's what's been going on for decades. I want to introduce our very special guest. I'm so flustered, so please, if I mispronounce your name.
You're doing great.
But it's Colette Martin. She is from Astoria, Queens. So shout out to Queens.
Shout out to Astoria.
She is actually a New York native. She's a mom. She has a 6-year-old child. She actually began volunteering with a number of gun violence prevention groups in the days following Sandy Hook, and that was again December 2012. She also supports common sense policies that will keep guns out of the wrong hands. But correct me if I'm wrong, you're also a gun owner.
Correct.
Right, and she's here in the studio with us. Colette, I just want to start off just getting some of your feedback, and the fact that you own a gun, that's really unique, because I think that when we hear a lot of people on the left talking about gun regulation and talking about gun control, we speak about it from a different perspective. Like, I've never shot a gun. I'm not around guns. I don't live in a region where hunting is a big part of my life, and that's the lens that I speak from, where you have other people in other towns and they're like, well, I grew up shooting guns. This was something that was fun for me, and this is something I do for recreation, and why would we want to put a ban on it and limit it? So I think that you have that very unique perspective, because you can talk from both areas. What would you say about what's going on when it comes to gun violence?
boy.
Where to start, right? Where would you start?
How long do we have? It is absolutely time to have this conversation. And I'm glad that 2 years after Sandy Hook, I'm here and we're talking about it. That makes me very hopeful and very optimistic, because heretofore, it's been the kind of situation where you have a Columbine, you have Gabby Giffords, you have Aurora. The nation is horrified and everybody's screaming about what's wrong, and the NRA is telling you more guns are going to solve this problem, and it's a moment in time and it passes. And so today we're here, with that weekend recently in April with 21 New Yorkers shot. We have a cop in a hospital clinging to life, shot by an ex-con with a gun yesterday.
Right.
We have a very bad situation going on, even though we're in a state and a city that have reasonable gun laws, that have pretty strong gun laws, that have gun laws that the NRA hates. And here we are in a city of 8 million people, and our murder rate is lower than some cities with a tenth of our population.
Right.
And that is a function of geography. You spoke about the iron pipeline. What happens is you've got this corridor from Miami to Maine, right? So you've got the perfect route to take advantage of lax gun laws in the southern states. In particular, you look at Florida, North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia, as you mentioned. Those are probably the 5 biggest offenders in terms of loose gun laws, where you can literally walk into a gun show on a Saturday or a Sunday, show nothing in terms of permits to own. They're not required. Background check, not required. You can show your ID for the state, a driver's license, and walk away with virtually any gun you want from a private sale. Federal firearms licensed dealers, of course, have to run a NICS check, have to do a background check. But when the workaround is so easy, it's the equivalent of going to the airport and having a line that checks, for your ID, and a line that says, let's just wing it.
Right.
So, and that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
I've said it's the equivalent to me as a mom of putting my kid in a daycare where only 60% of the staff are checked. Right.
Yeah, we
Would
just wouldn't do that. No, because it makes absolutely no sense.
Well, it seems like as far as our gun policy, we're only as strong as our weakest link, right?
Correct.
Where no matter how stringent
Correct.
our gun policies are in New York, if there's lax policies elsewhere, that's where if you want a gun, you'll figure out how to get a gun.
That's
You're
right.
not going to, go through the proper channels if you know that there's an easier way. I mean, that's just how it works.
That's right. And you'll find cities like New York, but not just New York, lots of other places too, are literally flooded with guns that come from states that have those laws, where gun trafficking isn't even a crime. It's not a crime at the federal level.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
I did not know that.
No, it doesn't make sense. The penalties are laughable. The penalties are like paper violations.
But yet, if you compare that to the penalties for being a felon in possession of a gun, which you now fall under the federal mandatory minimum, which are permissive, not mandatory, but you're still under the federal sentencing guidelines, and then the penalties become extraordinary. So if you're an individual who is a felon who is now in possession of a gun, then you'll go to jail for a very, very, very long time. And some of these people, let's remind you, are not violent felons. Some of these are people who have felonies for, say, marijuana, which we actually could say, that's somebody who maybe should be able to get their gun rights reinstored. That penalty is so exorbitant, and yet there's very little penalties, as you point out, for gun traffickers.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation that we have going on in this country. And I come from a family of gun owners. My dad was a gun owner. My dad was shooting rabbits with a slingshot when he was 5, in Ireland. That's where he's from. So there were guns around. There were shotguns. He lived on a farm. He came to this country. He's a veteran, served in the Army. We had a house upstate in the Catskills. There was always plinking going on in the backyard. And so it's not a function of being anti-gun or afraid of guns. And, I think we need to sort of take back that conversation, because there are plenty of gun owners out there like me who want universal background checks. To what country is this where you can walk into a gun show and buy a gun, find a group on Facebook and meet up with a guy in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot? And I'm not kidding you. That is not hyperbole. That is how these things happen.
It
you can
is.
buy a gun out of a trunk and post about it on Facebook, and no laws are being broken. It's this weird don't ask, don't tell policy.
Yeah.
You're supposed to look at the dude who meets you and know whether he's a felon or not.
terrifying.
And the easiest way to not know, to keep everybody out of trouble, is just don't ask.
Right. Guys,
Right?
if you're just tuning in again, we have in studio with us Colette Martin. She is a gun control advocate. Can I say it like that? But she also owns a gun, and we're talking about gun regulation here. One of the things I want to talk about is the argument I constantly hear about people who are, very pro-gun, and they'll say things like, well, this is why you should have looser laws in places like New York City and places like Chicago, because you guys have the most gun violence. Obviously, your laws aren't working. And to me, that argument is like bizarre. But what do you say to that?
What I say to that is faulty premise, faulty conclusion. Because the fact of the matter is we don't. We were speaking at the break. New York has 8 million people, and something like 330 gun murders took place within. Now, is that tragic? Absolutely. That's a ridiculous number. That's more than most countries in the world experience. And we shouldn't be blasé about it. However, New York and Chicago, New York State is actually the third lowest in this country in terms of gun violence. So that includes statewide. When you compare city to city, New York isn't even in the top 10 as far as the rate of gun violence. That is by population, which is the correct way to measure this, really. Chicago is somewhere low, like 8th out of the top 10. You have to look at cities like Detroit, cities like Knoxville, cities like Memphis and Birmingham. There are pockets of gun violence in this nation that make us look truly like a nation at war, where the rate of gun violence is so much higher than what it is here in New York. Our relatively low level of gun violence is a function of both good legislation, but also we are geographically gifted,
Right.
in a way, because
So
we're
we're lucky.
surrounded by states that have reasonable common sense gun laws. It does make it harder.
Right.
It just feels to me like we're just sitting around waiting for the next mass shooting to
Oh, yeah.
happen.
Definitely.
And it also feels like it's like a man. Well, one, we don't talk about these shootings that are going on in all these different cities with guns that, as we just said, are coming into the cities because of lax gun laws. But, it's like every time we have a big mass shooting and then everybody starts talking about gun laws, and then there's this immediate pushback from the NRA, and then it fizzles out. It kind of like peters out, and then nobody's talking about it. And then we're just, like I said, sitting around waiting for the mass shooting to happen. And we know that statistically, something like 92% of people in this country, gun owners and non-gun owners, support a federal universal background check law. Yet it can't get passed through Congress. Why is that?
Well, that's right. And that speaks directly to the power of the NRA, who you mentioned. And what we need to do as concerned citizens, as gun owners, in my opinion, is we need to question that. We need to wonder why a group that claims 5 million membership, now that makes them one of the strongest lobbying outfits out there. However, there's some debate as to whether that number is correct and how many of those are alive.
Right.
Because they do things like leave people on the membership rolls 20 years after they die, and
Just to build their numbers?
Absolutely, it's
Wow.
padded, but that's all about advertising revenue and circulation on their magazines.
Okay.
However, there are somewhere upwards or around 80 million gun owners in this country, 5 million of whom, on a good day, belong to the NRA. So we have to really question, where does this imbalance of power come from? Where does their influence come from? Because it certainly doesn't come from the gun-owning Americans at large, who have, en masse, rejected the NRA, right? Why isn't their membership somewhere at 70 million, 75 million? It works out to about 15% or less of legal gun owners who are actual members of the NRA. And even among NRA members, there is tremendous dissent with this extremist rhetoric that comes out of them in the wake of every mass shooting and every study that's done on gun violence.
Right.
Because, their job is not to represent me as an American gun owner. Their job is to represent Smith & Wesson.
The gun manufacturers.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that
Special interest groups.
there's not even an attempt to cover that anymore, where there used to be.
Right.
So I think that we need to just hold our legislators responsible.
No, we definitely do. On that note, we're actually going to take a quick break, but we'll be back talking more about, again, the gun debate here in America and what we need to do to stop gun violence. Don't go anywhere. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard. We are back, turning up here in the studio at Let Your Voice Be Heard. Again, this is WHCR 90.3 FM. My name is Selena Hill. I'm with Jackie Cohen, Alyssa Fuchs, and our very special guest, Colette Martin, who is here speaking to us about gun regulation and gun violence. And I know Jackie had a comment.
Yeah, so I have a comment and a question. So I like that you brought up this fact that, you know, upstate in New York specifically, there's very different cultural norms associated with guns, where there's upstate, you know, I was telling you before, my best friend grew up upstate New York. Her dad's a big hunter. I mean, everything you eat on their table has been grown by them or hunted, fished by them. And when we were moving to the city, she was my roommate for a while. Her dad said, you know, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with you guys having a gun, you know, just to protect yourselves, which we know nothing about guns, so it would have been a disaster. And then, you know, my parents who grew up in New York City, specifically like my mother who grew up in the Bronx, was like, I don't feel safer with you having a gun. I think that would be probably a bad idea for you to, me specifically. I don't think I would know the first thing about owning a gun. I would have to know a lot more about it.
Yeah. And I would have to agree with your mom on that, particularly for people who are not familiar with gun usage. The science backs up your mom.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Sure.
Because the likelihood of something terrible happening with that gun is much higher than the likelihood of you saving each other in the event of a home invasion.
Right.
Because you were never going to get a carry permit here in New York
Exactly.
for that gun anyway, so it was going to sit at home, probably unused in your dresser. And more than likely,
it just puts us at higher risk.
It does put you at higher risk. And,
Sure.
and I actually have a friend in Queens who's got a family member who was killed in a very similar situation in Nebraska.
Wow.
And he was a gun owner all his life, and that gun was there to protect him, and it was used against him.
Well,
in
that's a
commission of
very
another
often
crime.
thing. I mean, there's a lot of statistics, and I don't know them off my top of my head, and you may have a better understanding of those stats, but that people who have guns in their house are more likely to be killed by their own gun,
That's
more
correct.
likely to have an accident where they get
correct.
injured by their own gun, and especially in the context of domestic violence, we see that
That's
a lot
right.
of weapons are used in that context as well. So I was hoping that you could speak about that, but
Sure.
I was also curious about how you got involved with the issue in the first place.
Great question. I actually, you know, I think Sandy Hook gave us all pause, you know, any parent certainly at that moment in time, because, you know, when I was younger, we had Columbine, we had a number of other high-profile massacres that really didn't affect me. I have to say that. They were not in New York. They were happening in other places, Virginia Tech, you know. And all of these things happened, and they accumulated. And then I went ahead and had a baby in 2007. And 2008. Yeah, I should remember. But my son had been at school for all of 3 months. He was in pre-K. And life was great. And then December 14th happened, and I had a knot in my stomach, curled up on my couch in fetal position as reports came in from Sandy Hook. And all I could do was weep for these first graders. It was all I could do. I was literally paralyzed. I went and got my son from school. I didn't let him leave my sight, you know, for many, many days and weeks after that. I felt so helpless and so hopeless. And I knew that as a gun owner, as the details came out, there was so much that went down there that should not have been happening. There was so much to it. And I probably would have still just stayed very sad about Sandy Hook until Wayne LaPierre got on the air exactly 1 week after and told us the problem was Hollywood and the problem was video games and the solution is more guns in more schools.
Oh, God.
That's what moved me. So I actually frequently thank Wayne for that because it got me off my couch. It got me invested in this because with my son's school career had just started. And I thought there's no way I can go through 18 years, 22 years of his education being more guns around him everywhere he goes.
No.
And I don't think that makes any of us more free.
It really doesn't. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, that really speaks to the emotional side of things. And it does take us to feel some way attached to stuff to get involved. But, good kudos to you and good for you that you finally, you started taking action. You're doing so much work now, and we definitely commend that.
I just wanted to add a comment to something that you said way earlier, to go back to about the fact that those people who are in favor of better gun laws are also people who own and or use guns. Now, I don't own any guns, but I do use guns, and I very much like to shoot for sport, and I go to the West Side Rifle Club here on 23rd Street in the Flatiron District very often. I have been trained. I have taken, believe it or not, the training class they give is an NRA training class, but I have taken NRA training classes. I know the proper way to use a firearm. I know the proper way to not use a firearm. In fact, the first question that we were asked in the first day we took the class, which was, he held up a gun, which was clearly did not have the magazine on it, and he said, "Is this gun loaded?" And everybody in the class said no. And I said, "Of course the gun is loaded." And he said, "Right answer, because you always have to presume that the gun is loaded, because even if the magazine out, there could be one in the chamber, right?" So
that's right.
I think that there's a misconception, and it always goes back to the people who yell the loudest seem to always be the ones that are heard. Correct. And the people yelling the loudest are the people who are like, the Second Amendment says there shall not be restrictions on any guns. And basically, they're like, LaPierre, guns for everybody. Yeah. Everybody needs a gun, and that's just incorrect. And so we have to be the louder ones, the people who own and use guns. And we have to say, no, those people don't represent me.
So I have a quick question. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not coming from this is coming from a presumption. But I remember hearing something about the fact that some of these mass shootings that have taken place, maybe most of them, I don't know, these like major, like Aurora or I don't think Columbine, but some of these major shootings that have taken place were by people that were using legal guns. I don't know if that's So yes. I mean, so that's scary, right? Because there's these two different types of gun debates. One is the iron pipeline, where there's illegal guns going through that people are getting illegally, and another is that people are getting their guns legally. And maybe there's the answer right there, is that we just need stricter laws and we need to be able to regulate them more heavily. But what do you say about that with people that have guns that they've gone through the proper channels to get and then use them in this way? And why, maybe the bigger question is, why do people, besides hunters, people like yourself, own guns to begin with?
Right. Well, in my case, I mean, my husband is a hunter, so we have that.
Yeah.
My dad was as well. The guns are in my home. They are secured at all times. They are locked up 24/7 unless they're in use. They always will be. My son, who is 6, does not know they are there. I have no need at this point to let a 6-year-old boy handle a live firearm. That will come. And we laugh, right? Except go on Facebook. Yeah. Because there are people very proud of teaching their 3-year-olds how to shoot.
There was that girl that shot her instructor.
Yes.
Who was
No,
that was awful.
You see, I've seen stuff on the internet where people are putting a gun, and maybe it's unloaded, I don't know, in the hands of, I've seen guns in the hands of babies. The baby is in the carriage.
That's ridiculous.
And they're like taking a picture of their baby with a gun and putting it on Facebook.
Ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
And you know what's more ridiculous? The likes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, other gun owners are going on there saying, "Yeah, way to go."
Right. Sometimes I think these people are so crazy that they wouldn't pass a background check, and that's why they're against the background checks.
It's really unfortunate, and I try to make the point very clearly that legislation alone is not going to solve our gun violence problem in America.
It isn't.
When you bucket out gun deaths, right, which are hovering around 33,000 a year now, which is just you cannot even wrap your mind around a number that big. I know I can't. So 2/3 of that are suicide. That has its own set of issues attached to it, which I could talk to at great length, and it would fill up an entire show. Yeah. You've got homicides. So somewhere around 11,000 is what we can expect. That's, around 1,000 people a month.
Wow.
Getting killed in this country. Then you have accidents and other tragedies. Now, the accident part, talk to me, because I track every child shooting in this country, every unintentional, I won't say accidental, child shooting of children under 16. Do you know we cannot go a day in this country without a kid getting access to a loaded, unlocked gun. Why is that? That speaks to the responsibility and the culture that needs changing. The same way that Mothers Against Drunk Driving came out and said, we got to get better laws. We have to, get on better footing legislatively. We also have to change the culture.
Yeah,
friends
we do.
Don't let friends drive drunk, right? Because when I was in college, they did.
Right.
Wow.
So
I think that's a great.
listen,
in a
I think that's
generation,
a really
it
great
That
point.
just happened in Arizona. There was in this suburban area, this 2-year-old boy.
Yes.
He was being supervised by his
Yes.
grandmother and his aunt. He was with his 7-year-old brother, and he found a gun in bed sheets on the bed.
loaded
Shot himself
gun.
in the face. It happened again at Walmart. This woman, she was shopping with her baby son in the carriage. He reached into the bag. He reached into his mother's purse, found a gun, and shot and killed his mother in Walmart. This is happening. This happens like Colette said. This happens at least once a day, and I've been reading about it a couple times a month. You hear the big sensational stories,
If
and
I'm
it's
not
horrible.
mistaken, they found a loaded gun. Capitol Police found a loaded gun in John Boehner's suite
Oh, yeah.
bathroom the other
They-
day. That
they-
there was a
a child-
toddler,
a child
child
found it.
found the gun with
And-
Capitol Police.
No, they did. And you know what? We're going to have to wrap the segment up in a few more minutes. But before we do, let's talk solutions. One
Yes,
of the solutions
please.
is this big march that's taking place here in New York City in Brooklyn, Saturday, May 9th. Can you speak to us about this march and how people can get
can.
information about this?
it's such a wonderful thing. It's a march that's being hosted and organized by Moms Demand Action, who've just done tremendous stuff. They're one of the first groups I joined, not the only one, but one of the first that I joined after Sandy Hook and Wayne. And they organized this march, and it's just gotten bigger and better every year. This is the third consecutive one, and it's going to be massive, and we invite everyone to show up. I have met the most amazing people, through this accidental activism, as we call it, because I didn't, when I was in college, I wasn't doing what you guys are doing and, running my life. I wasn't an activist until this combination of events. So we march across the Brooklyn Bridge. We want to bring attention to the problem, because even though New York has good and reasonable gun safety laws, including the New York Safe Act, which I support, we still have this problem. Guns are cutting down our youth. Guns are affecting our communities. Guns are paralyzing and traumatizing children on a daily basis in this country. When are we going to do something about it?
Right.
We have great legislators. We want to thank them, because God knows the NRA and those insane people are going to be calling them when they try to pass common sense initiatives and take a stand. So why aren't they hearing from us? And I fault us for that as a community. Like, we have to not be so ambivalent and just accept this as a fact of life. Because when you delve into it, as I did after Sandy Hook, you find out that it's not that we have good laws happening nationally. It's that we have this quilted, weird patchwork that has so many loopholes and so many opportunities for people to exploit them, either for profit or for other motives, that it's no wonder that we have the gun violence problem we do. And there's so much we can do. New York has legislation pending. New Yorkers Against Gun Violence is another group I'm with, and they're supporting things like a safe storage bill for New York State. Believe it or not, you can leave a loaded gun within proximity of a child in much of New York State, and there's no penalty. There's no penalty for that.
And
New York City has safe storage ordinances. Albany does as well. But when I tell you, not a day goes by in this country that a child doesn't happen upon an unlocked gun. That's the truth, and somebody gets hurt.
What time is the march starting this Saturday, and where? Because I want to be there.
That is an excellent question. I have to check the time unless someone calling in knows it.
Is it on the Facebook page, maybe on a website?
On the Facebook page for Moms Demand Action. All you do is type in Facebook Moms Demand Action space New York, NY, and you'll get the page. I can also email it to you. And momsdemandaction.org is the website for anyone who doesn't use Facebook.
Okay.
And it's highly promoted and highly visible on both of their pages. I apologize.
No. It's okay, because I'm just like, I need to find out, because I want to be
Brooklyn
there.
Bridge Plaza on Saturday, May 9th. So let's cross our fingers for good weather, but it doesn't matter, because me and those moms marched in the height of January on Martin Luther King Day in 2013, weeks after Sandy Hook, and we froze our butts off, and we didn't care. So this is
That's passion.
This is easy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. And you guys should all get out there and get to the march. I just wanted to make a final comment about this before we wrap it up, before I let Selena wrap it up and we go into the quickie. But even Anton Scalia in the Heller decision, which is the decision which gave people the individual right of ownership and, essentially said that the Second Amendment doesn't just apply to militias. And Anton Scalia writes, like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. For example, concealed weapons prohibitions have been upheld under the amendment or state analogs. The court opinion should not be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools, government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. So this
Absolutely
is not
right.
to have these types of laws. And I know you said that the laws are just not enough, but the laws
Right.
in and of themselves, depending on the way they're written, are not going to violate the Second Amendment.
Absolutely not.
They fall
Absolutely
into exactly what Scalia is talking about here, about where you can carry them and conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms, which is essentially reads background checks.
Colette, can you
Absolutely.
just tell us again how people can contact you one more time,
Sure. I mean, me personally,
or the organization?
Moms Demand Action Facebook page, momsdemandaction.org website, nyagv.org for New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. And I really recommend that people check out the Brady campaign and their Asking Saves Kids campaign. We want every mom in New York City and every mom in New York State and throughout the country, when their kids have play dates and sleepovers, start asking about guns in the home. If they are there, are they secured?
Right.
Wow,
No, that's a great point, because so many people are so lax, like even with the guns in their own homes, and that's what leads to so many tragedies.
Correct.
But again, I think that, and I thank you for being that example of how it's time for us all to wake up. It shouldn't take a bullet coming through our window or someone dying in our family or immediate circle for us to finally care. I mean, this is happening every single day to one child in America, and that's one child too much. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back to the quickie right here on Let Your Voice